When you look at where AI is today, does it excite you more or does it worry you more?
The CEOs of the future, you're going to have some level of understanding of technology. That's how you're going to differentiate yourself. The data that model's been trained on, from a cybersecurity perspective, how do I know that's the data that I wanted to be trained on? Did someone else swap out that data? What version was that data when it was actually being trained?
Bigger risk, bad actors or bad code?
You can't beat human ingenuity. You're going to have people that are going to use it for good. You're going to have people that are going to use it for bad. When you have this agent-to-agent battle, I don't think it's just going to be just that agent-to-agent talking. I think there's going to be other agents that are monitoring that agent that then go and say, yes, you can trust that.
That moment in time, to me, it's like internet and identity theft. People are going to take over your digital avatars and your digital accounts. People are going to take over your data. I mean, there's just going to be so many of those things.
You don't see on the back end, there are attack vectors to actually people can inject things into that to then maybe siphon data out of that.
Did I hear you say we need a red button to shut things down?
I don't want to kind of like blow people's mind about this.
Welcome to the AI CEO podcast, where the future of business is built today. I'm Seema&x, founder of Virgin AI, growth strategist, co-chair of DC Startup and Tech Week, and your host. In this podcast, I sit down with CEOs, industry experts, founders, and investors to tackle the big pressing questions on your mind about AI. No hype, no jargon, just insights you need to stay ahead. Now let's dive in. The AI CEO podcast is brought to you by Virgin AI, helping mid-sized businesses accelerate AI adoption safely. Ready to lead with AI? Visit virgin.ai to learn more. Welcome to today's episode of the AI CEO podcast. My name is Seema&x, and I am your host. And today we have a special guest, Jerome Johnson II, because we're going to give major homage to your father today. Let's go. He's from AWS. He's the head of national security and defense for AWS. Jerome, I'm so excited to have you on this podcast today because, we're educating non-technical founders, CEOs, business leaders about AI. And your background, both in public and private sector, at the intersection of AI, cybersecurity, and cloud innovation, is substantial and extremely relevant right now. I'm excited to have you on the podcast for multiple reasons, but what I love about everything I've heard about you and our interaction early is that you're able to take a lot of your experiences and bring it into layman, anchor it into what's real. And obviously with AI, cyber is one of the most important strategies, important tactics to really understand when you're innovating in this space. So Jerome, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Seema, for having me. Just honored to be on the show and love the podcast. I've been following for a while, ever since we spoke about it. So happy to be on the show and educate your guests here and your followers.
Awesome. So my first question to you is, when you look at where AI is today, does it excite you more or does it worry you more?
This is a funny question. I would say, even from the lens that I look at, it excites me more than concerns me. I mean, concerns are there, but the excitement is more around just the innovation, the change in our lifestyle. I don't think a lot of people realize. I mean, people probably do, but I don't think they understand the gravity and the magnitude of the change that we're going through. It's a very significant technology shift, and I've been through a couple of these in my life. I'm 45. I may not look that.
I'm still older than you. It's okay.
And so, but I feel like I've had lived through a lot of shifts. But I think this is one for the ages, and I think it's going to launch us into another paradigm in thinking information technology in general.
So let's talk about that briefly, right? You've been through a lot of emerging technology shifts. Cloud was a really big part of your history in terms of work experience. And so are there parallels here from cloud and AI that you see?
Definitely. And I think this kind of gets into the current concern piece too. The similarities are, at the end of the day, it's this technology that is emergent, which with that, a lot of people get more concerned about the things that they don't know. So it's this known unknown. And with that, they're very careful about how they actually leverage and use it. And ultimately, I would say, back in the day in cloud, 2013, I would say that customers went through the 3 stages of cloud adoption grief. One was like, I'm never going to go to the cloud, ever go to the cloud. Then they try it out, and then they get to we're all in, right? Regardless of however they look at it from that perspective. And it's almost like an afterthought, specifically around security. So I think the same thing is happening with artificial intelligence, specifically with generative AI and currently where we're going with agentic AI.
So I want to just go a little deeper in that because what's that moment for a business leader to be like, this is okay?
Yeah.
Like, like cloud was such a big thing. To put things quote unquote in the cloud means your information is no longer on, your on-prem,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
meaning it's not on my computer, it's not on my servers, it's other people can access it, right? AI is going to take it to an umpteenth level of that,
Yes.
right? But where do you think the switch happened? Because again, I love anchoring the past to where we are
Yeah.
today and the future. So where do you think that happened for leaders?
I think a lot of it was the realization in terms of what I think the cloud promised at the time, right? Which is around efficiency and also reduce costs, right? And people will still debate, does it really reduce costs and there's really efficiencies that are being gained? But I think it's really, you see the I think it bearing its truth just based off of people now are talking about AI. And AI typically is ran off of the cloud. It's like a second nature thing, regardless of whatever cloud platform or whatever you define as cloud. And I think the aha moment was more around the gains and the benefits that they received on their business objectives and mission, if you were talking about from a public sector space, and how they can do more, right, with less in terms of infrastructure in general. You already starting to see the benefits of that specific with generative AI and the fact that you can just go to a chatbot ask it to do things. Even when we preparing for this, I use Claude,
Yes.
but you know what I mean. With that, just the response in that. So I think at the same time, at the end of the day, with cloud, the epiphany was look at how much I'm able to do, the amount of resources that I was able to leverage to be able to do that from a cost perspective, effort, labor, right? So I think the same shift we're seeing now within artificial intelligence.
So then in cloud, they're early adopters. And then there are folks, who are like, okay, I a year later, 2 years later, these brands did it. Now we can jump
Very,
on,
very true.
right? And
Very true.
so do you believe we have that same time frame
Mm,
for adoption? Because I think we know AI is moving faster than any other
yeah,
technology in the past. Moore's law is still true, which
yeah,
means the technology continues to evolve every 6 months, cheaper, faster, all of those things. But in a way, it's even faster with AI.
totally agree.
So I get that question all the time, like, can I wait a year? Can I wait 2 years? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, if you're waiting now, it's too late, right? And if we really were to think back into like artificial intelligence, it didn't start now, today, right? Artificial intelligence has been around. The technology that we're leveraging and using now when it comes to the generative AI piece, Transformers, which was actually created in 2016.
But explain
Was
Transformers because
yeah,
I want this audience to
yeah,
understand the
and think of
concept.
Transformers as just a way for the model to be able to understand like language itself and how it actually is able to do some level of reasoning. Reasoning meaning that it's actually now able to decide based off of what you're telling it, what type of output are you looking for based off of, the command prompt itself. But this technology leverages and uses a lot of data and processing. At the time when that was created, there wasn't a lot of resources out there. Cloud was just kind of a thing,
Hmm.
right? And now we're seeing this, and it's funny. I know we may get into quantum, but at the time I was doing a lot with quantum. This is like 2022, and then the chatbot era boom happened, right? And there was a lot
You
of
were doing
innovation and stuff.
quantum before the chatbot. I mean, it kind of feels a little backwards,
Eh,
don't you
Yeah,
think?
you know what I mean? The yes, the chat GPT
I
era.
know.
Yeah, right, right.
I got you. But I'm like,
But
quantum,
anyway,
ChatGPT.
yeah, exactly, right? But like you saw like that boom
Yeah.
that happened, and I think from there it accelerated just because of that technology and two technologies, one being the transformers I'm talking about, the other one being cloud or what I would call it hyperscalers, where you're actually able to leverage this infrastructure, this
Mm.
mass amount of infrastructure that actually uses a lot of power on the back end to be able to do a lot of the processing that we're seeing now.
Hyperscalers.
Yes.
I love that word. AI is a hyperscaler.
Very much so, right? Just like the cloud is as well. And I think as we continue to really be able to leverage and use this technology, it's going to take a lot of processing and power to be able to do that. And I think artificial intelligence, the promise of it, in order for it to really get there, is going to really kind of be hinged on a lot of infrastructure that we're seeing now, right? At the end of the day, though, you won't think about it. I almost look at it as like my daughter's 14. She loves computer science to a degree. and is coding, she's not going to care about where it's being ran. Not going to be
Mhm.
caring and be using artificial. She may be telling it what to do, right? It's kind of like where we're going. So anyway, I only mention infrastructure to say, like on the back end, just think of it as this like ubiquitous infrastructure, regardless what we call it, cloud, whatever it is. But that's what's actually powering artificial intelligence.
But it's interesting. Last night I was at the generative I want to call it meetup. Banjo actually is from AWS, and the D to D, data to data,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
all communities, they were there. I love that stuff, even though they were talking about MCPs, which I don't want to get into all the
Okay. Yeah,
technical
yeah,
stuff
yeah, yeah.
here,
Yep,
right?
yep.
But it was there. I mean, everything is focused on infrastructure. So if you're like, you start to think about like how you're actually building these agents and building all the things.
Sure.
There's a lot of information education for the developers right
Sure.
now, right?
Yep.
And so again, why I'm very passionate about the space is I want the business people to understand and the infrastructure. You're going to hire somebody to help and support you, or
Yep.
even the infrastructure now with no code tools like
Yep.
Replit and all the, Lovable and stuff. You can actually create things very fast without even coding,
Very true.
right? But
Vibe coding too. Yeah. All
high
kind.
coding,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that
yeah.
another one?
Vibe. Yeah.
Oh,
Coding.
vibe coding. Yeah, vibe
Hmm.
coding. Exactly. But it was interesting because again, I go back to there's a lot of education as it needs to be
Sure.
because even traditional AI data engineers, they need to be trained on this new world of
Sure.
agentic workflows and so again, going back to timing,
Yeah.
because and I want to get into like what you've been working on, things that you can actually share with
Sure.
us, right? Both on the public and private side, but like what because infrastructure is being built at the same time,
Hmm.
and I was wondering if that was the same case with cloud.
Hmm.
Are there any misconceptions that you can share with us that leaders
Sure.
have right now?
Yeah, I think a lot of leaders, I mean, I'll be honest with you, a lot of leaders, from at least the ones I've seen on the public and private side, understand the magnitude of artificial intelligence, right? I think that from a timing perspective, I think it really just depends on where they're entering the market. I think some folks have done like classical artificial intelligence, where they're actually identifying objects and personalization and things of that nature, right? To where we are now, to where I really do think ChatGPT really changed the way that people actually started to look at artificial intelligence and what it actually would do from a business model
Mm.
disruption in general. So I think timing, if we're waiting on regulation and policy to kind of take place, or even from a cybersecurity perspective, then I think it's too late. And I think there are some misconceptions around that. Specifically, I would say on the highly regulated industries around, well, what kind of regulation needs to be there, how we actually going to be able to, have some safeguards or provisions or governance around these models. Again, time is now, and the time is now means like I'm not saying you jump in and you create a model and you just have that be operationalized and actually put in your business processes, but at least upskilling your folks on where we are in terms of the market from artificial intelligence perspective, and then really starting to figure out how you can actually leverage this to be able to produce some type of outcome that you want from a business objective perspective.
Hmm.
And then how does your business model change? And there's so much disruption. I think the technology really is just, to me, enabling and empowering businesses to think differently, which should be, to me, a key differentiator. That's what it's going to be as we move in the future in terms of businesses. What's your differentiation? It's going to be off of leveraging artificial intelligence moving forward.
100%. We're going to get into what the future of business will look like because
Yeah.
that's a conversation I have a lot on this pod, but I just think it's just so relevant and you have to keep talking about it so people really understand. And I
Yeah.
know you have a great perspective on that. In terms of just, I think the urgency, I think you're right. I think business leaders understand to an extent. Folks who work for them, not always,
Yeah.
right? There's a
Sure.
different level of maturity. But there's even like, I think the urgency doesn't always drive action or just the understanding because there's a little bit of a lack of truly understanding what this technology is. Because it's not, to me, it's like, it's not just technology. It's what you mentioned, it's changing business models, it's disrupting industries, it's all of that, right? So maybe can you share some examples of how you've worked with folks in the
Sure.
past and like what was their storyline there,
Yeah.
to get into AI adoption?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this starts, and it's funny. It really depends, and I think you're right about some business leaders understanding the value of that, but may not. have the ability to change that based off of where they are within that organization.
Right.
You also have grassroots, and I'm going to kind of give two different examples. You also have folks that are closer to the technology or that business model, um, actually causing, asking for change. But then the leadership doesn't understand that and is not educated. And so, a great example of this is even when we started to do some of the more the initial like artificial intelligence models that were around computer vision, um, and convincing this case was some government partners to actually be able to leverage that within their space. And it came down to two things. One was cost, because, and I think this translates on into private sector too.
Mhm.
You have existing corporations that are then trying to have some level of transformation,
Yeah.
and typically it's a cost. It's a cost to change their business model to be able to do that. So the return on investment, how does that work, and how do you actually be able to come up with a business case to be able to say that? And I think we can always say, hey, if you're not like in the race, if you didn't start on the starting line with the other folks that are there are staggered, you're gonna basically end up last, right? Unless you have a sprint, and that sprint is like you actually find a champion to be able to actually leverage and use this technology. So a lot of times it came up with a business case that we actually had to present to some of the business decision makers at the end of the day. There was actually convincing policy, right? Actually going and talking to, in this case, the government in particular, to say, hey, these are things that we need to actually put in place so that government agencies can actually leverage. In this case, it could be appropriations to a bill to
Mhm.
be able to actually fund something. I think it starts there, right? To me, it all goes back to business in terms of the justification that you need to make.
Yeah, I mean, everything
And
should be
yeah,
focused on a business
yeah,
outcome. But can I ask you just to go deeper in that government side, and then I want to go into the
sure,
public side, right? Because, you know, government's always slower, but
yep,
I know a lot of people working on different initiatives, and obviously, with our new administration,
yep,
innovation is super important,
yep,
and they've invested a lot into AI infrastructure and quantum and other things
sure,
going forward. And there's a lot of change
yeah,
also happening at the same
yeah,
time. And then, each agency is supposed to have an AI leader. And why this is relevant for this conversation, on top of just understanding that, because our public sector is so important, but even founders are trying to get their ways into the government,
sure.
right? So there's this back and forth of like, are they ready for us? Are they not ready for us? Where are they right now?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I would say that, especially with the current administration, where at the end of the day they talk about AI dominance, right? And that space, I think this is probably the best time for startups to actually start to interface with government agencies, right? Where there's a whole bunch of things around efficiency, right, that they want to gain within that. They're actually looking to do that with automation. For startups, though, the thing to think about is, with your technology, how would that be adopted from a regulatory perspective? And I think this is where you start to have those conversations with some of the leaders in the government to say, hey, here's my technology, and there's other companies out there that can help bridge some of those gaps. And I would ask them to partner with that. Even for us at AWS, we actually have a flywheel where we actually work with, we call them ISVs, but like independent software vendors,
Okay.
right? And we actually have a marketplace where they actually can host their software on there. With that, we actually take them through the process of what it means from like a regulatory perspective to actually be able to have their product be hosted or leveraged with government agencies. I
Mhm.
think the key is, to me, this is the time for everyone to start to think about that. But it's really like looking at your technology, how that technology would translate to the government space, and then what are some of the other regulatory. And when we talk about regulatory, it's really more around how it's being secured, how it's being deployed. There's a whole bunch of other things that you have to think about that's really more operational than the software itself. But starting that conversation, whether it's through think tanks, even there's meetups that happen. I think the key is like really to try to get to know and understand that space. Because what I've seen with a lot of startups is they've come in. I'm talking about like large startups, even ones that are out there like that they're significant. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
no.
understand the government space. So
Yeah.
us working through that with them. So I think a leg up is just trying to understand what that industry, just like any other industry, and how you can operate in that space.
Yeah, no, and I love that because that dovetails into the cyber
Yeah,
conversation, right? Because security is probably the number one focus for governments,
sure.
right? Like,
Hmm.
and obviously there's all these other pieces to getting in and understanding that whole pipeline. That's not what this conversation will continue to be about, because I really want it to be on the security side. So, what does what does that look like right now? Like what, where AI is
Yeah.
today, what are the standards? And then we're going to talk about where it's headed.
Yeah. I think for AI, there's two things to look at. One is like how the models are being secured. In this case, like think of like we call them large language models, but the things that power the Claudes and the Chat GPTs. What I think with most startups, they're actually kind of leveraging those already, right? But it depends on how they're actually leveraging them and what data they're being sent. Like in this case, personally identifiable information. How is that being obfuscated in a way from whatever hosting platform you're in to not necessarily being logged? Like in this case, we have capabilities out there that doesn't do that. AWS with Bedrock that doesn't allow for us to capture information like that. But those are things you need to think about with your application. What do you store? Where do you store that personally identifiable information?
Where
Is
should
it
they be storing it?
right? So in this case, a lot of times it's funny. It's like very similar to how you store data even prior to that, right?
Yeah.
There's some storage appliance, but then it's like, how is it actually being stored from a security perspective? Is it being encrypted?
Hmm.
Is it being encrypted in what we call transit? In this case, sending the data from a hardware device or a computer to another computer. In between the connections, is that secure? And those are things that come up. Like they got pretty much already will have a way of them actually storing the data and sending the data, but are they securing it in a way? In this case, typically it's encryption, right? Standards that they necessarily need to follow. And then, I mean, there's a HIPAA, right? One as well, right? Around health insurance. But I think the key is, if they were to think about a typical software kind of like application, storing the data, how the data is being processed, where it's being processed matters, as well as like even the technology that where it's coming from, right? So the U.S. there's a very specific thing. There's something called FOCI, which basically is like, hey, is this coming from a source that we trust, right?
Foci?
FOCI is
Okay.
foreign. Think of it as basically more of a foreign kind of like logistical chain compliance piece to where like, is this coming from countries that we trust versus not? And again, I'm just talking about from a US base, but this
Yeah.
is any country,
Right.
right? Like they're going to want to know where that supply chain is coming from that perspective.
Yes.
In this case, it's just more technology than it would be materials.
Right.
But those are things that definitely you want to think about when you start to enter this space.
Yeah. I mean, look, you and I chatted about this, and this has been an ongoing conversation on the podcast, is how important data is to AI in terms of being able to leverage unique data sets to actually create insights, to create predictive models, to create unique business models in
Yeah,
the future. And so, again, let's just talk about data in
sure.
general and then think about that. You brought up, the
Hmm.
medical industry, finance, I mean, all these
Yeah,
government, they're all highly
sure.
regulated, right? So, what does that next phase of cyber look like when data is so important?
Yeah.
And the way AI works, the hacks are just very different,
Yes.
right? And so, give me your perspective on where you see this whole market going in the next few years.
Yeah. No, I think it kind of you know, going back to kind of like what you were saying, like to me, it depends on the attack vectors, right? One is around the model itself and how you're securing that. The other one is controlling access to that data, right? It's not just encryption. It's really, in this case, as Seema Alexander access this piece of data that's being used by, in this case, it could be used by any application. Let's just say it is a large language model or agentic AI. Do you have access to that data? And
Mhm.
what type of access should you have with that data?
Me as
And
a personal user of that software or me as a developer of that software?
amalgamation of both,
Okay.
right? So I think it's great for the consumer,
Mhm.
and typically the consumer, it's more around making sure that the consumer accesses the data that they should have. In this case, my personal information, I should be able to access that, but I should be able to access CMAs,
Mhm.
right? And
Right.
and having that, right? And to me, those are like traditional paradigms that we have now, but it's how do you do it within artificial intelligence,
So let's talk
specifically
about that
agentic AI?
because some of those are basic
Yeah.
parameters.
Yes.
So I guess let's start with this. What is AI going to change with cyber?
Yeah. So so if we would go back and just look at agentic AI,
Yeah.
then with agentic AI, it's really this autonomous. If we get there, right? And I'll
We'll
say
get
we're
there.
right. I mean, I should say if when we get there,
That's right.
right? it is supposed to act autonomously and have some level of decision making as a part of that as well. So in this case, a great example, we'll just go with like Tesla, right? So the cars when first started driving were basically more on cruise control. So
Yeah.
I click cruise control. Eventually, I still had to be present. You do on Tesla as well, but you had to pause and stop the car, right? With Tesla, it actually is more automated and it actually can pull in data from a whole bunch of other different data sources. So when you start to think about that from a cybersecurity perspective, the only thing that I did was say I want to go, in this case, to this location. On the back end, it's actually going and grabbing information from all these other different repositories. How are you actually being able to log and metrics on that to understand where it's actually going? In this case, like some audit list that's a part of that. Also, what are you doing if something were to happen? Like something that wasn't supposed to happen. Maybe there was an attack to where someone is injecting data that actually, in this case, we're talking about the Tesla, takes me in the wrong direction, right? It could be even worse than that.
Yeah.
What are we doing to make sure that we have some level of automation to actually prevent those things from happening? And then the last one on this too is if you start to think about the data that actually that model's been trained on, I call almost like credentialing. Like from a cybersecurity perspective, like how do I know that's the data that I wanted to be trained on? Did someone else swap out that data? What version was that data when it was actually being trained?
Hmm.
And these are things that I think we're going to have to start to think about just in general. But I think we're getting to a level of just not autonomy for, in this case, like applications that are doing things, but autonomy on cybersecurity. Where in
Yeah.
this case, we have a large language model or some other process is actually doing the cybersecurity on our behalf. And we're just human in a loop. And
Human in the loop.
yeah, right.
And you're just monitoring, or
That's
you're
correct.
getting the automation notices
Yep,
around, there's a potential attack, or this is happening
that's correct.
because it's trained.
Yes.
I want to anchor this to a movie for a second because he kept talking Tesla, and there was a movie, and I am it's the name is escaping me right now, but it's about like a little bit like the end of the world. And
Yeah.
it's like this
Good.
new era of cyber attacks, and they're using, AI is bringing on a whole new art of war,
Sure.
right? And
Of
all of
course.
those. And I'm not trying to be,
Yeah.
a Debbie Downer by any means, but the part of this movie, the Teslas were taken over
Hmm.
and they just started crashing into each other. And it was just like, it was, to me, that's a cyber attack,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And so, how do we, that's, I think, the biggest question when it comes to autonomy,
Yeah.
autonomous drones, autonomous robots, and,
Right.
autonomous agents,
Yes.
you know, like, what is the mechanism to ensure that we don't get there? Because
Sure.
the smarter AI gets, the more AIs are going to work with AIs to
That's
get
right.
smarter. We're not there yet. That's going to take some time. But even prior to that, it's also the way things are developed, right? So as a human
Yeah.
being, that's nerve
Of
wracking. And
course. Yeah.
even if you're in the innovation side of things, as infrastructure is being created at the same
That's
time,
right.
so as a cybersecurity expert for national security,
Yeah.
how do you think about these
Yeah.
things?
So I think there's a couple of ways that we think about it. One is how do we model what the bad actor is going to do? Right? And there's something called red teaming. So in this case, we know about if you're familiar, you've been following like large language models, there are parameters that they put in place called guardrails that basically don't allow it to say certain things. It could be curse words, it could be, anything from that perspective, right? We have cybersecurity professionals that be like, no, I want to ratchet that up. I
Yeah.
want it to curse at me. I wanted to do these things. So then that way I can figure out what a bad actor is going to do, right? So that's really more preventative, right? And if there's a way for us to actually start to train models to actually be able to do some of that red teaming. And then from there, come up with its own defense, very similar to what you would see from the virus scans back in the day. So the virus scans on computers, right? If you had a Windows machine, it basically knew about all of at the time, right? At that particular point in time, whatever that snapshot was,
Yeah.
all of the vulnerabilities that happened. And then from there, it would prevent those things from being installed on your computer.
That's
Right?
McAfee, right? Would
Yeah,
be going there.
McAfee was one.
That's the only one I remember.
There was another one. I forget.
As a personal computer, I'm like,
Exactly. Yeah.
make sure you have McAfee on. If you
Right.
don't, you're gonna get.
And I'm kind of dated because I switched to Mac, which doesn't necessarily have that. But what I'm saying is, it's just that analogy of like, think of it as like we're gonna have to have software, right, that's being trained. And you could think of it now not just being like a software that just sits on a laptop. It actually is really, in this case, more of a agentic AI, some model that actually would have the same level of attack vectors that go kind of like more of a model to model kind of like defense. And I think the
Mhm.
key is going to be, it's this racing condition, right? Because you can't beat human ingenuity. You're going to have people that are going to use it for good. You're going to have people that are going to use it for bad, just to get to, some for fun, some for a means to an end, right? And I think for us within the cybersecurity space is really how do you try to prevent those things from happening? And then also putting things in place that from an automation perspective or human in the loop that says something's going wrong. Here's like break the glass moment, red, hit the button that stops everything, or what we call an and-on cord within Amazon, right? To stop that process from happening or revert that, right? And so I think at the end of the day, as autonomous as we want a lot of these things to be, humans are always going to play a part, right? Because at the end of the day, the machines only know what they know at that time, right? And have that context that they have at that time. We usually will have a broader picture, so we'll always be there with, like, to your point, it may be a light blinking, something being notified to where now someone comes in. We need to be making sure we're building these mechanisms within the models or our processes, right, to be able to kind of intercede when something we feel like is a bad actor or something that
So
can cause something bad.
did I hear
Yeah,
you say we need a red button to shut things down if something
yeah,
goes
we need to
array?
make
No,
exactly.
I'm
Yeah,
being hon like, I mean,
yeah, no,
what is that mechanism in case
yeah.
something happens,
So I
right?
don't
Like
think there is a like standard
yeah.
with that from that perspective. I think these are more principles. And again, these are things that it's not necessarily foreign. It's like taking what we've already know in terms of a cybersecurity perspective,
Yeah.
and actually applying it to now this new age of technology. And this is going to happen again. Quantum's going to come around, whatever it is, right? And the key is really trying to understand what those vectors are and then what we do to prevent that. So I do think, as this continues to evolve, because there's new innovations that are happening as we speak. Last week there were a lot of innovations that happened specifically on certain things that we're doing from a technology perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are we doing from a cybersecurity perspective to actually prevent against that? And it's this racing condition, and it kind of gets into like how innovative folks should be, depending on what they're looking at, versus like what things should they build smarter, right? In terms of what they want to deploy and launch for
Yeah.
customers.
I mean, I feel like you're in the know clearly because you're not only on the infrastructure side with AWS, but you're focused on the government market. You're also obviously focused on public too, but heavily in
Yeah.
that market. So if I was a CEO or a founder, like how do I know how to structure my product to ensure
Yeah.
that, we're going to defend off of any AI powered hacks and future risks?
Yeah. And so I want to get into too many of the details here from a technology perspective. But the main thing is, again, how are you allowing access, right, to that data that you have for your product? Product could be, in this case, hey, I want to automate some type of workflow for, I say in the public sector, there's a whole bunch of things you could think about, like people taking calls and doing like more of a call center thing, right? Like, so with that, you have someone that is taking a call and now is interfacing with, in this case, let's say a chatbot. The data that they're sending to that, is that secure?
Hmm.
And secure meaning, is it encrypted? And this is like when we get into those like layers of depth when it comes to security. But
Hmm.
the main things to think about is restricting access to the individuals that only need it. I mean, restricting access to people that don't need it and then allowing access to people that do. And then what are you doing when that data is being protected? In this case, we call it data at rest, but basically being stored somewhere. And I think for a lot of founders, a lot of times it's like, first to market, right? And so you just build it to make sure it's functional, which is great. But you always have to think from a cybersecurity perspective. Okay, it's great, it's operational, it's functional. But what happens if someone, it's a bad actor, kind of knows something about my system to where they can actually interject data, right? There's prompt injection, which is something that's really coming into fruition right now within these models, to where people, when you go to chatbot, you send in, information. There's a lot of other information that's being sent in with it that you don't see on the back end. There are attack vectors to actually people can inject things into that to then maybe siphon data out of that you don't want
Mm.
to have. So there's standards around that. Like so a lot of these models just by themselves, vendors will actually have provisions in place. And this is even for like the what I'll call proprietary models. Think of Claude, Amazon Nova, things of that nature, ChatGPT, and even the open source models like Llama will
Mhm.
have some of these safeguards in place. That's starting to see happen. But I think it's just so emergent at this point that we're still trying to standardize, right? And the next innovation that comes out, which there are a lot of things that I feel like we are trying to create, we meaning the industry, technology industry, to create to get to the where I think we all want to go to where there is this autonomous thing that's on the back end. How we're protecting that again along the way, right? And regulation is a part of that too.
Yeah, no, I love the two sort of core areas about storage and sort of, what happens when you're using the data, when it's storing the data, like those two areas. But I feel like a lot of that has to do with humans attacking.
Oh yeah,
And now, if AI is attacking, what's the difference there, and what should we be thinking
yeah.
about?
And to me, at the end of the day, the humans are behind the AI. The AI, humans are commanding the AI to do something, but at that point, it's being tasked to do something. And I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about the example of like, in this case, a model to model kind of like attacking one another, or one attacking, one defending. It's the way to think about it.
Oh,
And same with like agentic AI, similar too, right? When
right.
we get to that point to where you have these autonomous things that are doing things on our behalf. And as a part of that, and this is Jerome speaking, I'm not saying this is the industry standard, but I
Yeah.
think what you're going to start to see is like, not only will you have, whether it's a large language model that's actually doing the processing like a chat GPT, you're going to have something that's accompanying that that's actually doing some of the defending. And we're already starting to see some of these things now to where, there's a chain of large language models that some of these processes go through before it gets to you. You send something in, it goes through a couple different filters. It's the way to kind of think about it before it comes out. So I think you're going to start to see that paradigm happen now, just more on the security side of the house. We're going to have a model that is there just to protect.
Protects.
Yes,
I mean, this is huge
defend.
opportunities for
Yeah,
entrepreneurs, right?
I totally agree. Totally
Yeah.
agree.
I mean, because this is the not even up and coming market, the market.
Right.
Because without security, none of this is going to work.
Of course. Yep.
Yeah, especially for things that you're creating that are substantial, real,
Right.
disruptive. We've seen, and this is an ongoing conversation, fake voice scams. Let's start
Yes.
there. And I'm gonna keep going from deep fakes,
Yeah.
supercharged phishing, to a point where, again, I'll give you guys some advice because I have kids 11, 15, and I was told, hey, Seema, like go in the middle of the woods and go have a safe word with your family, the four of you. And like, if you get a phone call that sounds like one of your daughters,
Yep.
ask them the safe word, and I'm not trying to leak out a cheat here or like give people, perspective, but this is, to be scared, but like, this is important
Yeah.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because, we're looking at video, we're looking at voice, we're looking at digital twins all day long,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I want to make sure that I have a digital twin because I do a lot of thought
That's
leadership,
right.
right?
That's
So,
right.
like, what does that look like? What
Yes.
should we be thinking about?
It's that's a great question. It's something I think about quite often, just for my own edification, to be honest with you, not even just for work. But I think the way that we're going to start to really try to defend against this kind of goes back to I'll explain technology called blockchain. And
Mhm.
blockchain is powered by a lot of the cryptocurrencies now. And the
Yeah.
unique thing about blockchain is it allows us. Yeah, I think we're in this digital world. There are things that are being created all the time. I could copy and paste something and say that it's mine versus yours. So how do you know what it originated from? And so what blockchain did was give us this immutable like audit trail, right? To say that at the end of the day, this is where this thing originated from. And I expect us to have some standards. And I say I expect because I haven't necessarily seen it yet, but this is kind of like where we're going to go, right? In my personal opinion, because if I take a picture of you right now, how do you know that I actually took a picture from my phone
100%.
or it's being generated,
Yeah.
right? I mean, these models are great. So we're going to have some level of standard, almost very similar to what you would think about like a social security number
Yeah.
that says that this came from Seema, this came from Jerome. And I think when it goes to like deep fakes, and then when we get into like, like you said, code words, and I've kind of started to think about this with even my daughters,
Yeah.
right? Like, obviously, that's from a human interaction, that's great. From an
Yeah.
autonomous perspective, and you start to think about it from that perspective, but we have to have some level of standard to say like, I trust this source. I trust where I'm getting this information from, right? And I trust where I'm sending this information to. And I believe there are going to be a lot of standards that we're going to kind of create as a part of that. And we're starting to have some notional conversations, but I wouldn't say like it's this
It's
standard.
this. So that's what I was
Yeah,
going to ask because
yeah,
I've seen demos of companies that are trying to kind of put meta tags behind any
yep,
image that's been
yep,
generated by any model, right? And then it becomes like, all right, if that stamp is there, even on the back end, then that means this is real, right? But I also love the conversation about blockchain. I've been heavily sort of educated in the Web3 space, and
mm-hmm,
and like that's the use case part of Web3 has always been interesting, right?
yep,
They're starting to figure some of
yep.
that stuff out. I actually have a very good use case my husband's working on. We can chat about that in a second, but where
Awesome.
I like Web3 and AI are starting to really
Oh
play a
yeah,
role
definitely.
and but it is that. It's the verification that this is real.
Yep.
And that's to me, where AI and I was just at the ETH conference, or now they're calling it crypto DC or crypto capital. But that was the main part of the conversation,
Yeah.
right? And last year, I remember I was moderating a panel on this and I was like, it was barely a
Oh
conversation.
yeah.
And I'm like, this is the most obvious use case. Like, so is it what you guys are already thinking about working with to help facilitate some of that?
Yeah, we're having some of these conversations now. I would say like, and they may have had even more in-depth conversations. I mean, just to not be privy to them. But I think the key out of all this, and I know we've kind of tap danced around regulation. I'm sorry, I got to bring it
No,
up
you're
again,
good. You're good.
right? But I think part of this is around regulations and standardization. Because even for the folks that you were talking about earlier, these startups are creating these meta tags. Well, that's great as long as their protocols and applications understand that. But what about if I'm creating my own? I know nothing about that standard,
Yeah.
right? How we're going to have this interoperability between our applications to be able to do that. And that's why I think at the end of the day, what we should be working on and what we're trying to have the government to kind of see from a cybersecurity perspective is that you need to create standards. It's not to say, and it's funny, this is why it's this racing condition. Innovation is still happening while we're trying to create the standard. And, but I think the more activity and just initiatives and startups that come out and we have all more use cases, I think the better we'll get in actually being able to define a standard. I think right now it's just the pace of innovation and where we are. And it's not this isn't to scare anyone. It's just more like it's kind of like where we are in the industry. It's like we're always going to have this racing condition. And I think you're going to start to see and what we advise customers, depending on where they're going with this, is like, okay, this application that you're going to actually now offer to consumers and your customers does at least meet these checks, right? And what we can do from our end, right? I think again, we're just getting into if you think about agentic AI to AI kind of discussion. Again, a protocol was just released a few weeks ago from Google, right? Around an agent to agent.
Yes.
Okay, so that's great. So are we going to start to standardize on some of those things, or is that where we're going to start to embed things? So I think that's kind of like where I think from a cybersecurity perspective, and I think regulation piece, that's what we're always kind of like battling and judging with is like, okay, so we think we have something there. Another one, if we ever get to it, is like quantum computing and quantum post-quantum encryption, right? And some things around that, which now there is a standard for that, and that's a whole other threat.
Well, let's talk
Attack
about that
vector.
in a second. We
Yeah.
will get to
So
quantum because but that's so interesting that there's quantum protocols already in place as AI is being. But I want to go back to
yeah,
what you were
that's same.
saying because that's part of the dilemma.
Yeah.
We want to innovate,
Yeah.
and we are innovating.
Sure.
But then it's like, a lot of these standards are not put in place. So the
Right.
advice I'm hearing from you is be proactive, be smart.
That's correct.
Just do all the things that you need to do to have the privacy
That's right.
standards in place, anything, obviously HIPAA if you're in medical, but focus on all the traditional stuff and.
That's
And I guess
correct.
what I'm asking you is what's the and?
Like, I guess, and in terms of like
Cybersecurity protocols
got
in
it.
addition to the traditional
Right. So, and I think that part, I think, is the part that we're
working on.
trying still figuring out. But I think the key there is just like I look at any other innovation that's happening, you got to be if you're going to be at the tip of spear building it, you need to be at the tip of spear in terms of like how people are thinking about it from a policy perspective,
Mm.
how they're thinking about it from that perspective, and be in the loop to where you're having those conversations. Okay, I have this product. Let me go. And they have a lot of these conferences out there now. Specifically, I know there's a Agentic AI conference that's out, right? And there's going to be a cybersecurity component to it, I believe. But
There
in
has to be.
right,
Like, yeah.
and so it to me, I think at this point, just based off of where we are, I'm not saying it's gonna be this way forever, but I think if you're at the tip of the spear, you have to kinda, like, be in that loop to where you can start to consult with folks to say, "Hey, here's my application. This is what I'm trying to do. What do you think about what are you seeing from your side that actually allows me to prevent that?" And it depends. I think when we start talking about the agent to agent protocol or, like, when we talk about deepfakes, like, these things have been out there now. A lot of attack vectors on those are really just more around, can we and actually they're using models actually on the other side to actually be able to defend against that, like processing this video
Mhm.
based off of some of the, details that we're seeing from the stream, we can kind of somewhat tell, right? And I think this is where it changes. Somewhat tell, like, if it is something that's been auto-generated or not. But I think the only way for us to get to this full-scale adoption is to create a standard,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, but think about in crime. Again,
Yeah,
this has been an ongoing sort of narrative, but like if you're able to create these deep fakes and someone didn't murder that person, but they got it on video.
that's right.
I mean,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that can change somebody's life in a
very,
heartbeat.
very true.
And you
And
could, I it's like these real. I always say innovation has implications,
right.
right? And there are bad actors to your point, but it's those things that I don't know if we can fully say we got that. We're that's secure. That's never going to happen.
Exactly. I think all we could do is the best that we can do based off of the information that we have at the time, right? And don't get me wrong, I think even for those things like going to court, I know for a fact that there are things out there now that try to just very similar to like school and folks that are using these models to actually create papers. There are ways that teachers are finding, like putting white space within the content to then kind of detect if it's been auto generated or not.
Hmm.
They're very similar things that are happening on the deepfake side. I think for me, it's more of like there isn't like this. Hey, here's a standard that's coming out saying this is how. To me, the only way to really get to that point is like we need to have a way to identify, and this kind of goes into like agentic AI to where like you have a digital assistant of yourself, a
Yeah,
digital representation of yourself on the web, right? Then from that point, I know who I am because of this digital representation. And I think part of this is also where we are in terms of the maturation in technology and where we're going to go. So I think we're just at that point, right, to where now we're starting to, dive into another pond or lake and saying, okay, this is a bigger pond or lake. Should I use the same or a different one to kind of get to the other side? And so yeah, and I think that's just, I wouldn't say the price you pay, but this is just all part of being at the forefront of innovation.
it
Is that
is.
you're trying
I'm
to
going to
figure
bring
it
up that use case I was going to mention. Last Mile is the company
out. Okay.
because this is an interesting concept because they're using Web3, blockchain specifically, and tokenization
Yep.
and AI. So the concept is there are thousands and thousands of oil wells that are decommissioned. Okay. That means that they're not pumping oil anymore. Okay. And what happens is methane gas leaks out and affects the ozone layer, and it has climate issues and all the things. So they normally just sit there. And so if you were to cap these wells with biochar and concrete, you can end up getting carbon credits. But it's 20,000, think about like 20,000 feet on the ground. That's a lot of capital
Yeah.
to cap these wells. So the concept is not even the concept. This is what they're doing is they're capping the wells. They're getting methane carbon credits and using a new methodology. And the new methodology, they have a proprietary methodology where they have AI in the drones to help ensure that there's no leakages for methane gas in the ones that they're capping. And then they're tokenizing once that's confirmed and they have all the data, they have multiple data points around all that stuff. The second part they're doing is they're tokenizing the methane carbon credits on the blockchain. So then it's real because there are a lot of fakes in the
Right.
marketplace. And, the World Bank buys these
Yep.
things, Shell Gas, I mean, there's huge international markets in this space. So that's another layer, and then the third layer is they're building a insurance wrapper with Lloyd's of London to insure against this whole process, which
Yep.
has never been done before. But the whole point was, I was like, wow, like this is, you could go out and just cap these oil wells and people are doing it. And there's no standardization. There's nothing that says this is real.
Yep.
And now all of a sudden you're using AI to help, because if a human had to go do that
That's
in the
right.
leaks, how expensive that
Right.
would be. I mean, we're talking potentially hundreds of wells over time, thousands of wells over time. right? But now you have a proprietary method. Now they're going to actually use that for a standard for the industry. That's where they're headed. That's disruption of a business
That's
model.
right.
And it's impact and profit.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And so that's why I like it's just an interesting thing is when you're thinking about your business, your cyber, there are tools like the
That's right.
blockchain to help verify
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the key is like understanding and knowing the risks that are associated to these things, whether in this case, risk to your business impact, risk to society,
Hmm.
and then based off of the application that you're creating, right, and the innovation that's happening there, and then at least having some foresight to understand, okay, if I do release this, what are those implications, and having that as a part of like specific for a startup, having that as a part of like your go to market plan, right, and maybe it's like, okay, based off of the industry that I'm in, I'm going to start with this industry that doesn't necessarily have, and my product doesn't necessarily have that disruption or innovation to where it has this significant impact versus like some other ones that I do think are significant and I think one or two things are going to happen. Either, it's great. You have, some level of profit that's coming in. And then someone says, hey, the thing you're doing is not secure. And then they take that down and you lose business. Or, the other one is that, something bad happens. Right. And I think the key is, again, definitely do not want to stop innovation. It's just, you got to think smart about the business impacts and implications
But I
to
think
that.
you're hitting it right on the head here, right? It's like I had the CEO of Trustable. I don't know if you know Gerald, but they're working on this whole governance and AI, and they have a SaaS model that really is helping people identify all the governance policies around a lot of their innovations. But that's a lot of what we were talking about, right? Because if you don't, I told him when we first started the pod, I was like, "How are we going to make governance sexy?" Right?
Yeah,
Because
of
it was
course.
like, it's the things that
Right.
people need to do,
Right.
similar to
Sure.
cybersecurity,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean, it's almost like, but when you're small and you're trying to build, like, it's not what you're thinking about. But as you get bigger,
That's right.
like you just said it, you can either all of a sudden somebody's like, you're getting sued
Right.
because you didn't have these things in place and everyone's information is out or whatever, those are the
Oh,
two
yeah.
things that can easily happen.
Right. Right.
So just be smart.
Exactly, exactly. And I think, it's one of those things, especially as a startup, right? You're scaling. And don't get me wrong, some are so successful, like they can scale within a matter of days, right? But I think as a founder, even as a business owner or a CEO, you're looking at technology and you're trying to figure out how it's solving that business need. But as a part of that, you're also looking at what are the implications by solving this business need? What are the other impacts to that could disrupt the business model that I have in place, right? Just based off of the innovation. And I don't think it's this perfect science. I think the key is like you're at least having that thought and that awareness and being cognizant of that as you deploy. And I do think a lot of times, again, first to market, we're out
Let's
there, or
go.
at least right. And I think it's just a balance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So agent to agent battles.
yeah,
Where do you think that's going to go ever?
yeah.
Like,
Again, I think we kind of touched on it in some of the previous conversations as well. Is I think that's kind of like when it's all said and done, right? And again, I think about what does this look like, and what do people expect the technology? And I think that's the thing. There's this expectation of what the technology is versus what it is now.
yeah.
But if we're going with the expectation that this is, again, when I look at agents, it's like this thing that's helping me. Great example, right? I have a Yorkie, and I was with my girls this weekend, and I had to get it groomed. But when I went onto the website, and I'm doing a whole bunch of other things, I got activities, I got the girls out with me, and it was asking me for information that I'm like, it's in this other system. And then I had to try to go to the system. And ultimately what happened is I gave up. Like the time that I had to actually be able to accomplish that, I didn't have anymore because
Right.
I had all these other things. When you start thinking about agentic to agentic AI, just the possibilities there, we're getting now, and there's a new concept like you just mentioned, model context protocol, to where just think of it as it's now able to access what I would consider these disparate or heterogeneous data sets. So instead of it knowing about a data set that it's about in its ecosystem, it's reaching out to this other thing. And there's things that are in place for that. But in this case,
Oh, when you say other thing, it's like system to systems talk.
correct, yes.
Yes.
Systems, but these systems know about each other based off of how the developer created it.
That's right.
Versus like it knows nothing about it. It just, and if we're talking about agentic AI, to where it's now starting to be have reasoning and make decisions based off of a goal, right? In this case, I could say, hey, register. I would like, dog's name is Max. I would like Max to have an appointment at this time at this date, right? And that actually go talk to this other system.
Yes.
Right. And so with that, it can go and send that information and does everything. And it does everything that I just did for me. Right.
Yep.
And all I had to do was submit that. So when we get to that point, then we can start talking about this agent to agent piece, to where I think in that scenario, like it would have to know that I'm Jerome Johnson, right? Me requesting that I'm Jerome Johnson, and I need to go and get this information from this other system that's not in the same system's ecosystem, and be able to grab that information. And then I still, like, where I'm coming from, where I'm like, it's me out here in this digital front.
Yes.
Is getting this information from someone else. Like, I need to be able to trust that too.
For
right.
real.
This kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. So I think when you have this agent to agent battle, I feel like it's going to be, and I don't want to kind of like blow people's mind about this, but it's like, I don't think it's just going to be just that agent to agent talking. I think there's going to be other agents that are monitoring that agent that then go and say, yes, you can trust that. Because there's other agents saying, hey, I'm getting this information from this data source.
It's the AI agent ecosystems that they're going to be built. So you and I know that. I think it might be blowing these people's minds right now.
Yes. But I mean, I think going to your point, about like, and I guess to bring it back to a business perspective is like, just think about it as, again, when we start talking about startups or even corporations that are starting to build these things are things you need to start to think about when we have that use case. And I say build a use case, but then think about the scenario that we're talking about and how you actually defend against that, whether it is another because there are going to be other cybersecurity startups, right? And I would say other businesses that are going to be, there's a huge space of opportunity for them. But I think it's going to be something like that. There's going to be these checks and balances that are happening in the digital world.
What do you think the timing is on that?
I think we're getting closer. I think within the next 12 to 24 months, we'll start to have this type of capability. Right now, again, I still think it'll be nascent and informed in terms of where we want to go from a robustness, but we will have this autonomous kind of world.
Yeah. So I have this concept where I'm like, okay, you talk chatbots, right? And I'm like, all right, think about you're going, call it I use this example, the Intuit website, the MailChimp website, and you're trying to figure something out and it's annoying, right? Obviously today's chatbot's traditional. You put information in and then there's 3 questions come up and I'm like, no, I didn't ask any of that. Right. That's not getting me to the point. So AI-enabled chatbots have a lot more contextual knowledge, machine learning that will hopefully get you closer to that end game or be able to drive you to a human if they can't answer it much faster. That's the goal, right? Now, my example is, say the internet goes out and then you come back on and that's always the big pain point right now. It's like, oh shit, I got to start over.
That's right.
30 minutes in, I got to start over. The most frustrating thing. Memory, right?
Yes.
And so my belief is that we're going to get to a place where that is going to pick right up and say, hey, Seema, like,
spot on.
And then not only is it going to pick up right there, it'll go back and say, hey, Seema, you're in Washington, D.C. That weather is rainy right now. Did you make sure you take that umbrella?
That's right.
Like, you
That's
know?
Right.
And then the second, I want to ask you the whole thing and then you tell me your perspective. Then as I move on over time to say their website or on a call or X, right? Like it is going to know me. It's multimodal. Correct. The memory's going to be
That's
there.
Correct. You're spot on.
And so one, is it right? I heard you say yes. So I love that.
I vision the world of that.
But then what is the cyber side of that? Because then now it knows me.
That's right. Oh, yes. Well, and when you say cyber side, it knows me piece, right?
Yeah.
Because there's two pieces. And again, this is where we start talking about attack vectors. Is it from the perspective of you protecting the data about you knowing itself? Or I also look at like someone else actually personifying you in a space. And then actually you get the adverse effect of that. Like you apply for a credit card. You know, I mean, it's the same thing, PII, but like it's one thing to siphon off data. It's another thing to now, because I think what you're going to start to see from a scam perspective is I have, it's Seema Alexander original, and there's a Seema Alexander version 2, right? Very similar to what you see on Instagram where they have fake accounts, things of nature. I think you bring up a a great point. And I think to me, it goes back to there will have to be. And I think this is the way I look at this industry. And I'm not saying that we're not necessarily working on it, someone isn't thinking about that. I just haven't been privy to those conversations.
Mhm.
But just the way that I've just seen the technology industry work from a cybersecurity perspective, there will be a standard that will be in place to say that we're identifying you as SEMA, right? And SEMA, you have your own kind of ecosystem. And it's kind of funny. Like I said, I think this is it's its own, you're a digital self of
Yes.
yourself, right? And it has
I'm
context.
gonna make a digital self of
Exactly,
mine.
exactly right. And
Yeah.
it has context.
Yes.
But there will be these frameworks out there that will allow for that. I think the reason why I say is I can't say anything now is because we're not necessarily there just yet. I think we're still building, even on the memory piece.
Yeah.
I think the memory piece is something that I think is important because it's almost like, okay, you're here, you're doing something now. Then when you go home, this digital assistant comes home. Maybe it's on your device, whatever your home kind of like device choice is, and it's just there, just present. But it understands that you're here versus there, right? Like when we have that type of kind of technology, like to me, cyber could be very similar. Maybe it is, and this is where like I'm pontificating
Yeah.
right now, right? But it's almost like maybe there is like as a part of yourself. Again, you fill out your profile, and in that profile it says this is my code word. These are other things that I know for myself or myself, and we kind of go from there. But I think again, there will be some level of standard and way for us to have some level of verification to that.
There's some things that we're working on. I'm excited. I'll share a little bit, but
Yeah,
I want to go back to what you said real quick around that moment in time. To me, it's like internet and identity theft.
yeah, yeah.
And so this is a whole other level where I think there eventually will be an insurance product because there's going to be a lot of
Oh, definitely.
risk, and that's going to happen.
Yeah,
People are going to take over
that's right.
your digital avatars and your digital accounts. People are going to take over your data. I mean, there's just going to be so many of those things. So I feel like that's the reality of all the bad actors. And there will be a standard of,
Right.
there's ransomware now and all those
That's right.
things. But I think that is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then that is another opportunity for insurance. I don't know how you mitigate around something like that yet,
Right,
but
right.
eventually they'll figure that
And
out.
I think to your point, like, and it's not to scare people say, "Oh, we don't
Yeah.
know." Part of it is like we're getting there.
Yeah.
People are, if we're thinking about it, there are other people that are thinking about this as well.
Yeah.
But I would say to your audience is like, how do you benefit from that?
Right.
Right? There's a significant amount of opportunity just in that alone, and business models that will be created for that. But anyway, I just want to make that plug too.
No, 100%. So one of the things that we're working on, which it's a little bit in stealth, but I'll share a little bit because I want to start to. It goes a lot in our conversation, and part of what we're working on is I would consider it like a personal operating system. Like,
Okay. Yeah,
what if your computer wasn't just a tool?
that's right.
What if it had your context, your
That's right.
content, almost like your second brain, and it helped guide you through tasks, through things, and and it has we have a lot of the newer protocols that we're thinking through and building in. But I do think some of the stuff can happen today. And
Yeah.
what I've been telling my co-founder, it's his baby, and it's like so exciting because it's a lot of things that we've been talking about over the last several years. But it's just like I almost feel like it's the bridge to, and a lot of my folks are not going to understand AGI, like
Oh yeah.
the
Yeah. Yep.
artificial
Yep.
general intelligence, where things are actually
That's where we're
autonomous,
going.
but the safer version.
Oh, yeah.
Because that to me is like right now you can create agentic workflows. You can create AI-enabled softwares and chatbots that have guardrails,
Yeah.
right? That you can create safe. I would consider them safe,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and that you can trust. And, obviously there's things to think about and bias and ethics and all that.
Right.
But once we get to, you've alluded to autonomous multiple times. So is that to you means that we're at AGI, like we're at artificial
That's
general
great
intelligence?
point. Yeah. So, and like to your point in terms of, just gauging the audience here in terms of kind of explain that, right? Artificial general intelligence, there's like about 5 different levels. And there's thoughts around that too, right? But
Yes.
I would say like, let's just go with that and 4 and 5, right?
Yeah.
4 being more of like, it can handle very very complicated workflows for very long, considerable time, days, years. Maybe the AGI is, right? Like what we talked about, Seema and Jerome, digital
Yeah.
copy of myself. That is at the end of the day, think about it as like, that is what the prompt that I put in. be me, whatever you want to call
Be
it. Right?
me.
Be me.
Answer like me.
Exactly, right?
You
And
have all
it
my
just folds up.
context. Go
Exactly.
for it.
And so for that, where I think the autonomous piece tying in the agents to that, I do think that's how we will get to some level. And then number 5 is like it actually running AGI level 5, it actually running entire organizations, right? And so I think the way 'cause some people think about it is like it's just going to be that a model that is the model of it all, and maybe it changed to other models and things of nature. But I think it's going to be, yeah, you'll have this model that's kind of managing a series of agentic
Agents.
AI, like agents that are just out there. And then those things are spawning off other agents. And right, you get this whole metaverse of agents, right? But I think that is how I do believe to me, that's the only way we achieve that. And I think to your point, we're already starting to see pieces of that, but I don't think it's gonna be this one kind of model that's thinking of itself. That model may be the one that maintains context or knows where to get context, right? Or memory, right? And knows how to call this particular agent, for my case, to go and sign Max up for a, grooming appointment, right?
Yeah.
But in the end of the day, it's taking those tasks. So I do believe, yes, that's how we get to AGI. And there's I know companies and folks in the government that are kind of thinking about that now and how that looks, right? It'll be interesting to see, like, what it turns out to be. I think the thing that's most fascinating about this is what we know now.
That's right.
A month from now, maybe something else, this other innovation that happened that kind of throws all these, and they may be backed by these things, but it throws all that out out of the window, and we kind of get the AGI a different way. But based off of what I know now, I think that's how it works.
I want to go back to anchoring.
Yeah.
Use cases, use cases, use cases. I think
Yes.
my audience loves use cases, right? So, just from a government side, from a public side, is there any use cases that you can share that really bring all of our points home?
Yeah.
Like, I think it'd be great.
Yes. Yeah. And I kind of brought up that one where like the digital
Twin.
self,
Oh, yeah.
right? Yeah. And I think the other one is like really getting to more of again, when I bring up examples, I'm really kind of thinking like future. I'll try to bring one that's recent too, but like autonomy when it comes to even what we do at home and how we get there. Like in this case, a use case of like, again, I told my Tesla that I put in the address and I send it from via my phone to come here.
Yeah.
But in this case, it actually, and I know it's kind of getting there. It reads my calendar. All I do is get in the car,
Yeah.
and then it travels to where it needs to go. But then it also knows that maybe you and I live in the same neighborhood, and you're going in a similar route, and you go a different route. I need to make sure that I know about this other car that's automated, right? This is like
So
traffic
you don't drive
control.
your car? You just let it go?
Oh no, I do at times, but then sometimes I still like to have control, right? But at some point, I would have loved
It's
to.
like the Batmobile. You just like,
Exactly.
let's pick
I
me
would,
up.
eventually, it's so funny because it has come a long way, and I think that's a whole other thing in innovation in itself. Because I've had my car since like 2022,
Mhm.
and where it is now is way to me in terms of the way it's navigating. But I think another use case is just around that to where you have this, it knows about, it has context about you, right? And the digital piece is more of like when I'm doing things out in the world to accomplish tasks that are a part of the internet. But the physical world would
Yes.
be more around it knowing that I'm coming into the house, it vacuuming. And again, we're getting there. Like there's like I have a Roomba, right? The Roomba does it, but I have to press the button.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Versus, and then there are ways that you can automate it, but it's still, I'm going to that one system to do it. I'm not going, I'm going to that individual system. I don't have like this hub. And again, I know that there are these hubs out there now. I know Apple HomeKit, it can integrate with Alexa. There's all these things, but to me, they're still disparate to do it to a degree. They still don't talk to one another. But when you get to the seamless world where you have that, I would call like home automation, I think is one. So on the government side, on the national security side, you can see, we start talking about autonomous like vehicles. You can see autonomous satellites that are actually able, based off of a threat, able to adjust, right, and actually defend against that based off of where it actually points to. And I think you already kind of see it now with drones, right?
Yeah.
But I think think of drones and on steroids, right? Because it's amazing to see what they were able to do in Ukraine. If you ever look at that, Ukraine has, and they're fully disconnected, right? So it's not even connected to the internet. It goes and does what it needs to do. But I think the world, going back to your point around, okay, you disconnect and then you reconnect. And then when you reconnect, it persists the state of when you were disconnected.
Yeah.
You may have done a whole bunch of other things during that time. And then I reconnect. And then maybe there are things that you want the internet to know that you did.
And maybe
And
not.
right?
Yeah.
And I think so. I think there are definitely those types of use cases. I think the smaller ones that you're already starting to see now are going to be what I would consider very rudimentary, I would say tedious tasks
The
that you see. You know what I mean?
the
Yeah.
automations, the things that are
Yeah.
that are task oriented, super repetitive, takes you a long
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
All of that can
And to
be,
me, that
yeah.
is low hanging fruit
Yes.
that they already are starting. And I do think us tackling those will kind of get us to this, to me, the more broader, wide scale, more impactful things as well, because you're learning as you go and do that. And again, I think there's still technology that's being built out. Again, we mentioned A to A, was agent to agent. There's like now this standardized communication protocol. There's other things that are going to, I think, take place in terms of when we start talking about agents, like how do you actually control those, right? And I think for the business folks in the room, it's more of like, okay, you see what's out there now. What's the business case that you want to solve, right? Now, leveraging, talking to your folks, whether you are the technologist or your technology team, is like, I want to do this. How can we do this thing? Leveraging, and I know about agents. I heard about it on this podcast, right?
There you
Oh,
go.
and
I
then
hope so.
exactly, right? Just a plug. But to me, it's really understanding how is this going to disrupt the business model? Digital twins, things of that nature, autonomy. Yeah,
The one thing I'm going to ask you to change in that vernacular
sure.
is it's not just about the technologists understanding, it's the business leaders.
Yes.
And why I say it is because to me, this is not just a CTO, CIO thing. This is a CEO. It's like if they actually understand what this technology can do, then they can innovate and create
Very
new
much so.
business models, right? And I think there's a hand in glove, obviously legal and compliance and all. Again, startups are a different ballgame, right?
Yeah,
But it's
yeah,
like that's where I like really emphasize. I try to
yeah.
focus on because I'm like, this is not just a technology
Oh,
play.
definitely.
This is a shift in the way we do business play. It's a shift in the way we innovate. It's a shift in the way we automate. And honestly, like, I actually have, yeah, so I'm just curious. One, do you
Yeah.
agree with me there?
Oh, yeah. And I was gonna say, if I can chime in real quick,
Yeah.
because this is something that definitely want to touch on. Like, so, I actually just finished, went through a program via Wharton. It was called the Chief Technology Officer Program. Just finished that, right? And it's about executive leadership,
Congratulations.
right? Thank you, and innovation. And I
Yeah.
only bring this up to say that at the end of the day, the CEOs of the future, to me, just like how like they understand business in general, whatever their business domain is, you're gonna have to have some level of understanding of technology
Yeah.
because that is again that's how you're going to differentiate yourself, right? And not you don't necessarily need to know like the weeds and the cover things. It's really more again, it's not the technology, but how are you adjusting your business to, and it's more like change management
That's right.
to be able to adopt that technology and in this case operate your business based off of the technology that you're leveraging and using to achieve your business outcome, right? And I think for a lot of the CEOs out there, it's like there's a whole bunch of courses that you can take to just understand the technology, but you're understanding technology just enough to be able to understand how you can apply that to your business outcome. And then I still think being a business owner
Yeah.
of my own, on the physical therapy side is like understanding also the like you got to understand in order for you to run your business, you got to understand certain elements and what questions you need to ask your team to be able to understand that you where you're trying to go in your achievement and your vision, and be smart enough to be able to know when to change direction or not.
Yeah. And actually, you can start to ask ChatGPT or
That's very
Perplexity
true.
or
Yeah, that's very
Claude,
true.
hey,
It's,
here's my
yeah,
business. Here's what is happening
very
in
so much
AI.
so.
Please research it for me. What should
Yeah.
I be thinking differently, right?
Yes.
Because I mean, I shared with you, and I talk a lot about this on the podcast because I'm going to keep talking about the future of business. Because in my belief, and I'm working through the timeline, just kind of re-engineering, but like eventually all businesses are going to be intelligent. There's going to be a
Oh,
baseline of
definitely.
intelligence because company software, everybody is implementing AI. AI is not going to be a word. There's just going to be a level of intelligence. The second data is going to be the biggest competitive advantage if you have unique data sets and things that are substantial enough where you can create insights, decisions, predictive models, business
Yep.
models, all the things around it, licensing. The third to me is humans in the loop until they're not.
That's right.
Right. And goes back to our whole conversation on agentic AI and
Yes.
ecosystems of agents over time, but it's monitoring that. There will be humans in the loop for a while,
Mhm.
like up to a
Mhm.
certain point, but then there will be a level of trust.
That's totally true, and I think that trust will come from more benchmarking. I think that's the human in the loop is really there to make sure is it doing the thing that's supposed to do. And I think right now you hear about these systems that are undeterministic, right? There'll be a certain level
What
of
does that mean?
determinism. Undeterministic meaning that there may be a slight variability in how it actually produces the outcome,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's something for business leaders to understand that as well, right? In terms of what does that look like. But then we get to a certain point to where 99% of the time, it's going to do this thing. The 1% of the time, what do we do if it doesn't do it, right? That's the other aspect to that. But anyway, yes, I think you're spot on in terms of like there will be there will be portions of the application, and I look at it from the perspective of like the things that we do now and the things that we know we have domain experts for. They're the ones that are going to help benchmark these things. Once those things are in place, it unlocks us to go and do other things that we can
100%.
do, right? And that's that, and it's still leveraged off of that domain experience. So that you have and that you brought. But I think benchmarking is important. This is what I was going to say in terms of like what the metrics are you using? How do you make sure that it's achieving what you expect to achieve
Yeah.
very accurately and consistently?
Yeah. My co founder says this a lot, and you bring up a good point. It's like the undeterministic piece. It's like, even like humans make
That's
mistakes,
right.
but we put machines in different standards, right? But even if you look at data centers, they'll be like, it's 99.7%
That's right.
uptime. Like, if you
That's
don't know
right.
what that
That's
means,
right.
it's like there is this level of error,
Yeah.
right? And that's what we have to mitigate risk around because it's never going to be
I
perfect.
totally
We're
agree.
not, there is going to be even human error in the way, an AI agent was
Yeah.
created, or one of the protocols gets messed
Yep.
up, or there is a hack. Like,
That's right.
it's just the reality. And that's what business continuation and all those other pieces of a regular business are for, right? So
Yep.
I agree. Real quick, the fourth piece of it, though, is that I really believe, no, this is perfect, that brand is going to become
Oh,
a
yeah.
key differentiator. And there is a big narrative around like AI is smarter than humans, so everybody needs to be a generalist. But I'm like, all of these other things are going to be the same, meaning in terms of some sort of level set, you need that to continuously to be able to like distinguish yourself in the market.
Totally agree. And I think the brand, I think it, again, is predicated on how you're able to leverage that technology to get that
That's
differentiation.
right.
I look at it as like, again, going back to my example of like trying to schedule a grooming appointment. It's like if whatever you're offering makes it easier for me to be able to do what I need to do in a very short amount of time, and I look at this technology as being able to do that, then I can focus on other things that I need to do, and that to me is the brand
Yep.
piece of it.
But it's
Yeah,
funny because it goes to first principles in the sense of like, are you making this faster for
that's
me?
correct.
Are you making
Yeah.
this more convenient, or are you making this cheaper?
Mhm.
Right. And at the end of the day, if you're doing that, if you're doing all three, hallelujah.
That's
Like,
right.
you potentially got a winner.
Yep,
Like,
yep.
and that AI can do all of that by 100, by 1,000, if you put the right Lego pieces
Totally agree.
together and have a very strong business outcome that obviously has major pain points in
That's
the
right.
marketplace. All the first
That's right.
principles.
That's right. That's right.
Quick shout out to one of my favorite partners, Legacy Sessions, the studio where we tape the AI CEO podcast in the heart of Washington, D.C. If you're a founder, business leader, or creator who wants to look and sound world class, Legacy is the spot to record. Beautiful sets, pro level production, and a team that just gets it. Visit legacysessions.com and tell them I sent you. We're going to do some rapid fire questions
Yep.
if you're cool with that.
I am.
Okay. Let's get into overhype versus underhype.
Okay.
Okay. AI agents.
I still think it's underhyped, and the reason why I say that is that it's still in its infancy. Most people right now are still talking about large language models, right? Generative AI.
That's right.
So, and I think again, even us having this conversation, bringing more awareness, right? And I think I've started this journey a couple of months ago to where we are now, to where I see it now.
Yeah.
Right? When I was talking about it, there wasn't a lot going on. So anyway, I think it's underhyped, but very soon we may say it's appropriately hyped or overhyped.
Overhype. Okay. Cybersecurity startups.
Oh man, this is a difficult one. I would say from the lens of importance, I would say it's underhyped in the sense that I don't think a lot of people really in the industry are focused on it to the degree that they are. Usually they're focused on the outcome, right? Which is like the benefits that we get. I know a couple, I know a founder that's in the startup, cybersecurity startup phase, but I still think it's not necessarily at the forefront of when a business is trying to actually try to accomplish a goal or mission outcome.
Right. Okay. Open source AI.
Ooh, this is an interesting one. I think it's underhyped. And what I mean, and again, when I say underhyped, I'm talking about like how many people are talking about it. I think currently we're going to get the biggest gains based off of what's happening in a proprietary perspective because of the resources that they're able to leverage and use to create the models, to actually build and generate the infrastructure and to be able to scale. But eventually, I do think just very similar to Linux and some of the other open source things, Linux being an operating system that was open source, which is a counter to Microsoft's
Mm.
operating system as well. In order to get us to, I think, where we truly need to be, I think it's going to happen with open source models.
Okay. AI regulation.
This one I think is like appropriately hyped. And the reason why I say that is that I think it's important and it's something that we should think about. But I also think that it shouldn't hinder us from innovating. I think we should just be considering it as we move along and you're in that process. As you're doing innovation, are you considering that, right?
Okay. I think it's really important personally, just because and we didn't get to chat about the
Yes,
EU regulations and the US regulations. But again, I think the theme of this whole podcast has been be proactive, be smart,
that's correct. Yeah,
which means like pay attention to all the, not only the standards of where businesses today, highly regulated or not, but anticipate that it's going to get more stringent. Like, discuss.
very true.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Fast picks. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Bigger risk, bad actors or bad code?
Bad actors. Bad actors.
Okay. Bigger opportunities, public sector AI or private sector AI?
I say public sector AI because I feel like there's a lot of low hanging fruit that we can still go and accomplish and just to modernize them.
You're biased.
I'm just saying from
No.
bigger bang for the buck, but you're right.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
got no side of them.
No, I love it. I love it. One word descriptions. AI in business future
Foundational.
equals.
Yeah, foundational. I think foundational in the sense that that's talking about key differentiators, how we're going to be in the future. If you don't have AI, I think it's going to be very difficult for you to have a business.
Cybersecurity by 2030 equals.
Autonomous. And I think we're going to get to that point to where, if you're talking 2030, all the things that we talked about, some of these are very manual. There is I would think of it as this singular kind of like process and workflow that has a human in a loop. We're not going to be able to defend against the things that we are going to see in the future if everything is operating on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Your personal AI stack. What are the
Yes.
top AI tools you can't live without?
Yes. Got to shout out. So I would say internally to Amazon is Amazon Business and Amazon Dev, which basically is very similar to what you would see from a productivity office perspective and development and code. Love Claude. I use Claude personally I look at it as like tasks that I may need to do, maybe post, maybe even right now, like we were talking about, I have my own professional kind of body of work that I have in that and I use that. I use ChatGPT for image creation. I think the new models that they have on that are significantly better. And I also love Perplexity. And Perplexity has been
It's my favorite.
it's got in. I would say that if I ranked them in order, Perplexity would be number 2,
I love
and
it.
then Claude.
I think
so-
Perplexity is going to take over Google.
I think Perplexity is awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. Okay. If you could whisper a sweet nothing, I'm kidding. One piece of advice for a CEO or a founder who's looking to create an AI-powered business, what would it be?
Well, no. So I would say, I think going back to what we said, that looking at where artificial intelligence is going, I think there's a lot that we covered here, from cybersecurity, from where I was considered like just a personal consumer perspective on what that looks like. Like, how are you adjusting your company to be able to capture that technology? Because it's not the technology as it is the pace of innovation, what happens within that sphere. So how are you creating your company to be able to adopt and leverage that at a very rapid skill pace? So to me, change management is probably, I would say, it's number one, I think, in priority over just artificial intelligence. Because right now it's artificial intelligence. Eventually it's going to be something else. So I think creating your company in a way that it's able to innovate and change, right, at a very, I would consider like low kind of like cost up front to be able to adjust to the new technologies that keep you competitive and differentiate yourself, I think is key.
I just want to dig in real quick there because that's a really good point. Again, it's agile mentality,
Yeah.
but isn't it different today than it was with the internet and the cloud and the digital sort of transformation because of where we know technology is headed right now? Like what you just said, I just want to, because I really think what you're saying, I mean, that's been advice forever, but I think it's more pertinent
Oh, yeah.
now than ever before.
Yes. And again, I've seen this even when cloud started, right? There was a lot of companies and I would have these conversations and I'm like, either you do it or someone else is going to do it, right? And very respectfully and tactfully, right?
Sure.
And I think again, we're at that age. If you're not thinking, and I want to say thinking is to me is still 2 to 5 years behind.
Right.
If you're not like introducing this technology, whether it's within your own company with your employees to get them to try that out or figuring out new business models that you can create based off of that, you may not be here in the next I would say next 2 years. I was gonna say 2 to 5, but I think it's the next 2 years just based off of the pace that we're on, right? We're talking about agentic AI. I guarantee you we're not talking about this next year.
Something else.
It'll be, you know what I mean? And so, yeah.
You know what was really fun about this conversation? And I'm going to say it like, you're one of us. In a sense, like, I think we know too much.
Yeah.
Right? And so there is this sense of responsibility of getting this message out in layman ways and getting people, like, I love all your anchors. I love, thinking about your dog's appointment and, all the Tesla, because it's like, these are real life things happening today. And then the real advice for business leaders and refining, not just refining of business models, but new and disruptive business models, right? Because we know where the tech is headed, and this is not going slow. This is going faster than we've ever seen. And there's a lot of education still needed.
Totally agree. It is not one of these fads that we would see, right? Yes, I totally agree.
Listen, Jerome, thank you so much for being on the AI CEO podcast. I knew I was going to enjoy this conversation, but I really, really did enjoy it. You brought so much gold, so much information on a really important topic, cybersecurity in this era of AI. I feel like we can have a second conversation as the technology continues to become more powerful. Maybe 6 months from now.
Yeah, love to be on.
I hope you're down.
Yeah.
But thank you again for listening to this week's AI CEO podcast. If you got all the gold that I know I did, and I'm sure you did, please like, subscribe, and comment to this podcast and share and spread the word. I'll see you next week. That's a wrap for this episode of the AI CEO podcast. If you found today's conversation valuable, don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. It helps me reach more leaders like you and continue bringing in top AI first founders, industry experts, and visionary CEOs to share their insights. AI is evolving fast, and the CEOs who harness it today will lead tomorrow. Stay ahead of the curve, keep learning, and keep building. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.